So we're going to Comte. I want to see a show of hands if possible. I don't know if Ivy can put on the gallery. How many people have heard of this cheese or know of Comte? Yeah, it's a very, very famous cheese. It's an awesome cheese, and it's again one of those 45 special cheeses of France that I mentioned. It's made again close to here, as I mentioned as well, about an hour and a half away. And they take the cheese, they take the milk, sorry, and they bring it to these places called fruitières, where they take milk from several different farms and they do the cheese making process and put it in big molds. And I don't know if you guys, you've heard of Comte, but I don't know if you've ever seen a Comte. It's, I don't know if you can see me, but it's this big. It's 40 pounds, no, sorry, 80 pounds, excuse me, 40 kilos, about 3 feet in diameter. And they just, it's big, it's a big cheese. So these fruitières aren't able to necessarily age it, so they actually send it to master affineurs, so people whose job it is to just age the cheese. So that way they're able to control everything, and they sort the cheese by which farm it came from, which season it came from, and they age it. So the youngest Comte you could probably see on the market is about 6 months, and you can find them all the way up to about 42 to 48 months, which is really, really hard to find because you're basically just paying the rent at that point. You're paying for the cheese storage. So today we have a 14-month Comte. So it's going to be a nice balance between that saltiness that you're going to get after about 18, 19 months and the creaminess you have in the very, very young Comte. So it's right kind of in that sweet spot, we like to say. It's fruité, so it's balanced between the two. You're going to have a little bit of the saltiness and the nuttiness. And so that with the wine is going to bring out a bit of the richness. It's going to kind of stand up to it. It's not going to be super, super young. It's not going to be too old to hide the Pinot Noir. So it's going to be right in the middle that really balances with the Nuits Saint-Georges and gives it a nice balance, as they say. So if you want to look at your cheese, I hope you all have some Comte. It should have been one of the easiest cheeses to find. If not, it's pretty similar to Gruyere. They're a little bit different in the fact that Comte is going to be a little bit nuttier and a little bit more robust, and Gruyere tends to be a little bit younger and sometimes has some little bit of holes in them, little eyes they're called. So this is the Comte version. So I get milky notes, I get some dried fruits and nuts, a little bit of that saltiness as well. As I mentioned, there's the appearance of some of the casein crystals that come from, aging the cheese this long. And so like a slight saltiness that should really play into the wine as well. So we'll turn it over to the wine portion. I've already started.
Okay, well, as I mentioned before, if you have any Chardonnay to pair with this, I really, think it's a great pairing as well with the Chardonnay. That's really traditionally an ideal pairing. But this Nuits Saint-Georges from 2015 is a great vintage. It has a Pinot Noir with some really zippy acidity. I mean, for a 5-year-old wine, it's still pretty young. It's got moderate to heavy tannins. I'd say a little bit heavier tannins than maybe what a lot of people are used to. But the acid is bright and really prevalent in this wine. It's a good cheese wine because of the acidity, and I think that's what struck us with this pairing, that had good acidity in it that would work well with the Comte. The Nuits Saint-Georges is aged in 50% new oak for a year and a half before it's bottled. But if you smell it, you can see that the oak is really integrated and not very prevalent in the aromas or on the palate. For me, it's more about the earth, the dark red fruits, and less, of the vanilla, smoke, and toast. So really the fruit and the earthiness of Nuits Saint-Georges really comes through. I'm getting a little spice note and some currants as well, but it's still actually a little bit of floral characteristics as well. But with the Comte, I think it's the weight and the body of this Pinot Noir. It's not heavy, dark, dense Pinot Noir. I think the acidity in this really matches with the Comte.
And this is a fairly classic pairing, as we are, still in the region. We're the same region, essentially. We're about an hour and a half apart. Nuits Saint-Georges is going to be north of Meursault. So it's going to be one of the last villages in the Côte de Nuit. No, sorry. No, it's not. Excuse me. No, it's not. That's Jumelé-Chambertin.
The Côte de Nuit.
We're in the Côte de Beaune. It's in the Côte de Nuit. I still, after a year and a half, there's so many appellations. It's incredible. But we're in the same zone, essentially, as a cheese. So they really do go well together. And that's what we're trying to convey.
Yeah, and this is still quite young. The Nuits Saint-Georges, I think, another 5, 7, 10 years from now, the acids, it will start to round out. You'll pick up more of the earthy, leathery notes will come through. But it has everything you need in a Burgundy to help it age in terms of the fruit, the acid, the nice tannins. This wine should hold up for quite some time. I'm really looking forward to taste this wine, the next about 5, 7 years from now.
And we haven't made a Nuits Saint-Georges since, have we?
That was the last vintage. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a special one.
Yeah. I decided it was a really great vineyard site that we worked with the grower able to get, but I decided after 15 to keep the focus more on the Côte de Beaune. And so we've really, after 15, have been making just wines from the Côte de Beaune and south, closer to home.
Sure.
Any comments, questions on the pairing?
I see thumbs up. That's good.
Did everyone compare it with the Chardonnay?
Yeah, it it really could go either way. And it's one of the tricky parts of this. And the Chardonnay also is a typical varietal of this region as well. So it really is meant to go with that as well.
I think it's best with an older, I think an older white wine is really ideal, not so much a young white wine with this cheese. It'd be an older, something with some age and some nuttiness.
Can I ask?
I did try it. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry?
I'm sorry. I just wanted to ask Hannah. I'm still thinking about that great huge wheel of cheese that you described.
It's
And
so big.
Yeah, and I looked at my friends here on the porch and I said, "Wait, can't you make a wheel of cheese any size you want? Like, what? How do you determine what? Is there something about the cheese making process that feeds into that? Just tell us a little bit more about that."
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the really big things is the animal you're using. So cows, they produce a lot more milk than goat and sheep. So it takes less cows to make a big wheel of cheese than it would goats. So you're not ever really going to see an 80-pound goat cheese. Well, you're never going to see an 80-pound goat cheese because that would be like 600 goats being milked like 3 times to make something like that. So first of all, Comté, you can do that because they're very highly productive cows that are making this cheese. And then this is an old Alpine cheese. So when the cows come down for pasture, they want to be as productive as they can with the milk they're using. And if you're going to age a cheese so long as to say 36 to 40 months, it needs to be big. It needs to be big because if it's small, you're just left, it ages so much, it shrinks so much, you're just left like a little rock. You're not going to have any flavor, any notes, or any nuances. So the bigger you make the cheese as it ages and loses some of its moisture because it sweats out the extra moisture, the more saltiness and flavor you're going to get. And so Comté it's historically made this way. I think it's the molds they had, the farmers were using, and they're big copper kettles, and it was the best way to conserve the milk the longest for the cows they were using. And so what it does is it ages again from the outside in, the outside in, and so the center is really the best part. It's called the heart of the cheese. And so if you can ever get like a triangle shaped piece at your grocery store or cheese shop, that's really the heart. That's where the most flavor is, the less rind, and it's really, really just yummy. So basically, to summarize, it depends on the type of animal, depends on the breed of animal, and it depends on the region and just kind of the tradition and history. So Morbier is actually made from the same cheeses as Comté, but it's a different style used, and they actually traditionally use the leftover milk from Comté to make little Morbier. So again, it's a function of supply and demand and how much time you have and the necessity and the type of cheese you're looking to make.
I think also, when you go back in a lot of these, the size, the volume and all that, I know from the wine side of things in Burgundy, you know, these traditions go back centuries, and it was basically decided upon what can be done in a day by a worker and how much can be. So a lot of it goes back to what a day's work can produce. Maybe it's a day of milking or a day of a person producing. So I think a lot of these are just traditional, you know, that started many years ago that they've just maintained.
Yeah, I think they didn't have refrigeration, so they had to take the milk and they had to make it into cheese. So I think depending on the herd size and the pasturing, so if they, you know, were in the high mountains and they had to come down once a day to milk, they wanted to do as much as they could and be as productive as they could. So I think that was also one of the reasons that they ended up so big.
Great. Any other questions? Okay, well, Hannah?
The last one, this is our favorite. I think we all decided this is our favorite pairing. So this is another one of the Big 45 AOPs. So I think this is probably the most maybe famous, well-known cheeses we've all had in one sitting. This is truly a special tasting of the fact that you're exposed to so many really high-class, amazing, but old world cheeses. I mean, there's amazing new world cheeses, of course, but these are historical cheeses that, you know, you look at the cheeses being produced in the States and other, you know, new cheese making countries, and they're basing their cheeses off of these old cheeses. These are cheeses that have been around for over 100 years. Roquefort is actually one of the oldest French cheeses, and it's the oldest AOP cheese, the oldest one of these special 45 cheeses. It was granted the AOP status in 1925, so that was almost a century ago. So it's been special for a long, long, long time. And it's really cool the way they make this cheese. So the legend goes is that there was a shepherd who left his bread and he left his milk of his sheep in a cave, and he came back a week later to find a blue cheese, and he thought it was really great, so he tried again. And basically they make the blue mold. They take bread, they let it mold essentially, and they take that mold and they add it to the cheese, and then when they pierce the cheese to make the blue veining, that's the mold that reacts with the air and makes the typical blue. So it's a really ancient thing. We're talking caves, we're talking burnt bread, we're talking molds, and we're talking sheep. So this cheese has it all, and it's just, you don't see many things like it. It's aged in limestone caves, so it contributes to the creaminess and the texture because you're in a damp environment. So it's not going to be a super, super hard cheese. It's going to be creamy. It's going to have some funk to it. And this one is actually from Papillon. So they actually make their own bread. They burn it, but leave the inside soft so that it molds. And they take the molds after a couple months, and then they add it to the cheese. And that's how you make this cheese. So Roquefort is one of the saltiest, one of the strongest, and one of the funkiest cheeses in France, and perhaps in the cheese world. And so we thought it could stand up to this big red wine, this big Petit Verdot. At first, I was like, what are we going to pair with Petit Verdot? It's pretty tannic, it's pretty robust. I hesitated with Roquefort because, again, it's pretty salty, pretty funky. But we put the two together, and they were both tempered. They both kind of, became more balanced, more equal. The saltiness played with the big red fruits. The tannins came out with the funk of the sheep, and it really is beautiful. So I invite you all to try your cheese. It might be crumbly, it might be soft and squishy depending on its age, but it's going to be funky. It's going to be really funky and really blue and have a nice bluish greenish color to the molding. And it is sheep, so it is going to have some more acidity than you would have in just a Gorgonzola or a Danish blue. It's going to be a bit funkier than that. And because of that specific mold called Penicillium roqueforti, which now a lot of blue cheeses are made with the same strain, it's just a really special cheese.